Okay, it's past, so I'll make a start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar for the project, The Material Culture of Wales, England, 1540 to 1790. So this is a research project that is a collaboration between the UK National Archives and the University of Exeter, and we're funded by the Leverhulme Trust. So my name is Dr. Emily Vine, and I'm a research fellow on the project. I'm joined today by the project's principal investigator, Professor Jane Whittle, and the project's co-investigator, Dr. Laura Sanger. And I'm just going to, there we go, change the slide. So this project team is transcribing, indexing, and analysing the contents of a very large sample of 25,000 English wills from the Prerogative Court of Canterbury. We've used artificial intelligence to auto-generate transcriptions of these 25,000 wills, but we're also working with a large number of volunteers to help us manually check and correct these transcriptions. So to do this, we're using the crowdsourcing or citizen science platform, Zooniverse. And in today's webinar, we're going to introduce you to the Material Culture of Wales project and also our Zooniverse site. We're going to start with a conversation between Jane and Laura about the aims of the project. And then in the second half of the webinar, I'm going to briefly demonstrate our Zooniverse site and let you know how you can get started. We're recording today's webinar and we're going to upload the recording to our project's YouTube channel at the end of the session. Prior to today's webinar, we asked Zooniverse users and our social media followers if they had any questions that they wanted us to answer today. But please note that today's webinar is non-interactive, so the chat and raise hand functions have been disabled. So to begin with then, I'm going to hand over to Laura and Jane, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emily, and welcome to everybody. My internet seems to be stuttering a bit, so do alert me, Emily or Jane, if I suddenly go quiet or disappear or anything like that. So I'm delighted to be here today talking about the project in the midst of what is a very busy teaching week for me, so it's really nice to change my perspective. And I'm just going to be asking Jane some questions so that we can sort of talk through the origins of the project and the kind of unique method that we're using in order to explore our wills. So Jane, when you invited me to, I think it was a couple of years ago now, I got an email from you sort of saying, would you be interested in joining this research, the funding application that you were putting together in relation to wills. And wills are not something that I'd worked on previously, so I went away and found out a bit about it and then very enthusiastically responded to say, yes, I'd love to do that. But I know that you'd already been thinking about wills and been talking to Mark Bell at the National Archives about their collection and what was possible to do with them. And I know you've been doing that for some time. So I wanted to start by asking you why you were drawn to wills in the first place and why you're particularly interested in them as a historic resource.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, on the face of it, you might think wills are rather kind of morbid document. People make them when they're approaching death. But in terms of early modern history, they allow us to do things that you really can't do with any other type of document. They're the only type of personal document that survives in such large numbers for that period. And although, like some people might say, well, they're actually legal documents rather than personal documents, we can think of them as personal as well as legal, because people could really make choices. They made a choice whether to make a will or not. And then they made choices about what they decided to mention in it. So if they made choices about specific bequests, and then when they decided to give something to someone, they also made a choice about how to describe it. So it offers us this little window into what people's priorities were at this really important point in their life, which tells us things about the family, but it also tells us things about how they thought about their wealth and their possessions.
Yeah, that's kind of really interesting, having spent a lot of today discussing with my students the difficulties of trying to recover kind of more ordinary people's experiences, and you know, the kind of tricky way that you have of often trying to approach recovering some of these experiences. But as you say, because wills survive in such numbers and also give us this sort of quite rich detail about a variety of different aspects of life, they're incredibly useful to us. So I wondered if you might talk a little bit about sort of the key research questions that underpin the project and the key things that we're trying to find out.
Yeah, so we're particularly focusing, the project's called The Material Culture of Wills, because we're particularly focusing on the types of bequests people made and bequests of particular objects. So this is like a long-standing interest of mine, is sort of how people related to the things that they could buy and then own and have in their houses. So the kind of history of consumption, but going back right to the early modern period. So we're going to use this really large sample of wills to look at how bequests change over time. And when we do that, we know we'll see a change over time of types of objects that people are leaving. But there'll also be kind of more subtle changes about the priority between objects and cash and other kind of financial bequests. And in the way that objects are described or prioritized within will. So for instance, like cooking pots are really important in the 16th century, but we don't expect to see them being important by the time you get to the 18th century. And when you're looking at bequests, it's really interesting to know what the differences are in the types of people who leave different types of objects. So the most obvious dimension is the dimension of gender. We already know that men's and women's wills are quite different, that they seem to have different priorities. And that's partly about legal differences. So there are restrictions on what married women could do with property, and most married women didn't make wills for that reason. But there are differences that go beyond that seem to be about kind of different attitudes that different sections of the society have about the things they owned, and that's what we're really interested in getting at.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think both you and I have kind of, we're quite comfortable with working with those long chronologies. But I have to say, this is one of, this project is taking me a bit later than I would usually go. So it would be really interesting to trace how these things are changing over time across our different time periods that we're looking at.
Yeah, no, we really wanted that long-term perspective. So that, I mean, the 17th century will be different from the 16th century, and then the 18th century will be different again. So yeah. Yeah,
that's great. So as we've heard, we're over the course of the project, we're going to be transcribing 25,000 historic wills. So if anybody listening is familiar with wills, you'll know that this is a huge undertaking. It would probably take you years, probably decades, if you were going to try to do this by hand. So our project has quite a unique methodology. It uses both machines and humans in tandem to try to meet this challenge. And we're going to speed up the process by doing this. So we're developing a new digital technology called handwritten text recognition software, or HTR. And that is going to auto-generate our initial transcriptions. So I was thinking that for those people who haven't encountered HTR before, it would be really useful if you could just explain what that involves, or kind of how does it work in a nutshell.
Yeah. So kind of using HTR for early modern documents is now reasonably well established. So people have been experimenting with it for perhaps the last 10 years, but it's still it's still being developed. So the way it works is you don't just kind of shove in a document and get a perfect transcription out straight away. It's a bit more complicated. So the first stage is that you you have to teach the program to read the particular type of handwriting that you're working with. So in order to do that, we started the project by having a team of expert transcribers who helped us transcribe a selection of wills from the different periods that we're going to be looking at. And we then fed those really carefully done transcriptions into the program so that it could learn to read. And then from that model that it created from those initial transcriptions, it can then have a go at transcribing all the other wills that we want to transcribe. But unfortunately, those transcriptions are not perfect. They have problems, and the problems are caused by the fact that there are different hands, so different scribes writing the documents, and so that varies. It's also about the layout of the documents, which is quite variable, as you would expect with handwritten manuscripts. And it's also about the quality of the images. So we're working with, if anyone's ever looked at the PCC wills, which are available online at the National Archive, they are digitized microfilms, and they're quite messy, noisy images. So that's another difficulty. So yeah, so we have these transcriptions, but they need to be checked and improved. And that's what the Zooniverse stage is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, HTR seems like this amazing technology which could completely transform the way that that we're kind of engaging with early modern documents and make them so much more accessible to people. But at the moment, it still very much requires quite intense kind of human intervention and a high level of skill in order to make it accurate enough to work with. Once our HTR model, you know, we've heard that it's going to be trained, and we're now applying it to our wills and auto-generating these transcriptions. And as you said, the next stage is the Zooniverse stage. So could you just talk about how that works? So we've got our auto-generated transcriptions. How are we going to check and correct those?
Yeah, so Harry Smith, who's been a wonderful postdoc doing the kind of Zooniverse technical stuff for us. So he is uploading our transcriptions onto the Zooniverse site, and then that enables volunteers via Zooniverse to check those transcriptions. And in fact, you can do two different things. You can either check the automated transcription, or you can do a new transcription of a line. And both of those are really important, because we then feed those back into our automated transcription model, and it gradually gets better. So the more corrections people make, the more accurate is the model that we can apply to the whole set of wills. So it's a really sort of iterative process, and it means that any help that volunteers can give us via Zooniverse really helps improve the model. And you might see when you're working on Zooniverse, looking at lines, some of the lines are really bad, the transcriptions are really bad. And that's just like, that's the way that the HTR seems to work. But like sometimes it will give you a perfectly transcribed line, and sometimes it will just like really mangle it up. And so the more people can help us to spot those bits where it's kind of gone wrong, and correct the little glitches, then the stronger the model becomes, and that helps the whole kind of the whole set of wills. So you're not just correcting one will, you're correcting something that then feeds back into the model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the, well, I mean, there's so many different aspects of this project that I've been enjoying, but seeing how the HTR works and how it improves and develops, but also, as you say, sometimes it just surprises you with something that's very good or something that's very poor, and it's not entirely clear why that is. Yeah. And I would also say there are often some quite funny transcriptions that that are auto-generated. So amongst the team, and also now on the talk boards on Zooniverse, people share these kind of sort of things that aren't gobbledygook and could kind of make sense, but clearly aren't, you know, a correct transcription. So it's kind of fun to stumble on those. So obviously one of the key sort of products or outputs from the project is going to be a database which will contain the transcriptions of 25,000 wills. And then obviously the research team, so the historians on this call, our other research fellow PhD students that are on the project, are all going to draw on the database in their research in order to produce histories. But could you talk us through what exactly will happen to the transcriptions themselves? Obviously, we've got loads of people that are helping us to produce that material. So they, in some ways, are owners of the transcriptions. And could you also then talk about any other sort of outputs or products that will also, that the project makes possible in the way that it works?
Yeah. So there's really two separate things here. So one is the transcriptions of the wills, and the other is the database that will contain like information that we've drawn from those wills that we can use in our analysis. And a central part of the project was always that the transcriptions would be made publicly available, and particularly so that they could be available to everyone who's volunteered on the project, and because it's your work as well as our work. Obviously, for the transcriptions to be useful to anyone, they need some sort of index. So they will be made available with an index so that they can be searched by people in place. Unfortunately, we're not kind of developing a really swish database using the wills that will be online for people to use, because that we simply didn't have funding to do that. But it's it's kind of on a wish list for the future, maybe to find a way of doing something like that. But instead, we will provide like files of transcribed wills and then a simple index that people can access. So that's going to be publicly available at the end of a project, if not before. In terms of what we're working towards with a project more generally, well, obviously we'll be kind of writing up research and getting that published. So we very much want to publish some articles that really summarize the findings of a project. So discuss how bequests change over time, look at how that relates to people's religious beliefs, attitudes to death, and so on. A key output of a project will be an edited volume where a whole range of historians will use the findings to look at different aspects of types of goods bequeathed or types of people who are bequeathing them. So for instance, there might be a chapter on clothing and textiles, or there might be a chapter on kind of on mariners and their wills and how they're different from other people's. There's also two PhD students working on the project, and their PhDs are going to be an important set of findings from the project. So one of the PhD students is looking at wills and gender, and the other is looking at global commodities in wills. And yes, so these things will be available for people to read as well.
Fantastic, yeah. So all sorts of things will kind of come out and grow out of the project in the way that it's set up. So we did, before we hand over to Emily for a demonstration of exactly how Zooniverse works and how people can get involved, we did have a question from one of our current Zooniverse users, which was about what particular aspects of wills we're going to be trying to analyse. So do you want to just say a little bit about what will be, what patterns we'll be looking for?
Yeah, so we'll certainly, I mean, one of the things we really wanted to look at was who exactly the people are who had their wills registered at the PCC. So the PCC is the highest church court in the country, and we know what in theory, it's people who's had property in more than one diocese, and generally people who are wealthier, but no one's ever done a detailed analysis of, exactly the type of person who's using this court. So that's one of the things that we'll be able to do is produce that data. So the type of people and where they live, so the kind of geographical spread of those wills. We'll definitely be looking at that. Obviously, we're going to be looking at the types of bequests that people leave. And we'll look at variations by sort of occupation status, and also variations by gender.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and that kind of contextual knowledge, that knowing more about the nature of users of the court will be so useful for anyone that uses PCC wills, and gives you that sort of bigger picture. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane. It's really nice to kind of just explore the sort of origins of and development of the project in more depth. We're now going to hand over to Emily, who is going to talk us through how Zooniverse works.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laura and Jane. I'm going to try and share my screen again. And hopefully you can see my web browser. And I'm just going to spend a few, thanks, Laura. I'm just going to spend a few minutes showing you, first of all, how to get to our Zooniverse site, but then how to get started as well if you'd like to join us in checking 25,000 wills. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get to our Zooniverse site. You can go directly to the web address or QR code that we shared on our opening slides, and we'll share those details, that slide again, at the end of the webinar too. You can go to Google and type in Material Wills Zooniverse. That will bring us up as the first result. You can also go to the Zooniverse website itself. So this is the Zooniverse website. If you scroll down to the projects, you can see that we're one of their most recently added projects. This is us here. You can also search for the project title. So if you type in material, we come up here, the material culture of wills. You can just click on that and it will take you directly to our site. And you don't need to sign up to Zooniverse or make a Zooniverse account. You can just jump straight in. So this takes you to our homepage, and there's a brief introduction to our project here. And then if you scroll down, you're presented with a few different workflows. If you want a refresher with reading early modern handwriting, you might want to start with the workflow entitled Handwriting Training. And that's got a sort of very helpful tutorial that you can work through. But today I'm going to demonstrate how to use our main classification workflow, which is checking transcriptions. And for the purposes of illustration, I'm going to click on this button that says Checking Transcriptions 18th Century. So this classification allows you to check and correct automatically generated transcriptions of wills that were made in the 18th century, and it's going to show you just one line of text at a time. So when you click on that button, a pop-up tutorial appears, and you can work through this tutorial by clicking through the arrows. We're going to cover some of this information in the rest of this demonstration. If you click out of this pop-up, you can also find it on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm just going to move my view of Zoom. So you can toggle between the tutorial and the task window. So you can return to the tutorial at any point if you need to. So when you click on this classification, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen an excerpt from a will, and you'll probably see about 6 or 7 lines of text. Now, normally the middle line will be underlined in red, and this is the line of text that we want you to check. Normally you're shown 2 or 3 lines before or after the underlined line to give you more context, but we just want you to transcribe the line that has been underlined in red. Underneath this image, you'll see the transcription that has been automatically generated from this underlined line of text. And we'd like you to compare this transcription with the image above. If the text is an accurate transcription of the original line, we'd like you to go to the drop-down menu on the right-hand side of the screen and select Transcription Accurate from this drop-down menu. So that's quite straightforward if you feel that the line of text is accurate. You'll also see an editable text box in the task section on the right-hand side of the screen. If a transcription is not accurate, and even if there are just one or two things wrong, you should make changes directly to this editable text box. And when you've made these changes, you should click Done, and then you can submit your edits. So I'm just going to compare these live, always a little bit tricky when you're doing this on the spot. So I think I'm going to change that O to an E, and her children, that's not spelled correctly. So I've made a few edits to that transcription, and I'm going to click Done to submit it. And now I've been presented with another transcription to work through. So that's the straightforward part. You make changes to the editable text box on the right-hand side of the screen, you click Done, and then you're presented with another line. But the accuracy of these automatically generated transcriptions can vary quite substantially in quality. So don't be surprised if the text to correct is either really quite accurate or not very good at all. So not every image or transcription will be straightforward. And the drop-down menu allows you to tag an image according to a variety of different scenarios. So some images might be difficult to read. If you're unable to make out the text in the original image, then please select Image Unclear from the drop-down menu. Sometimes part of the line will be unclear, but the rest will be legible. In those cases, please make changes to the text that you can read as necessary, but then select Partially Unclear from this drop-down menu. If the text is in a language other than English, such as Latin, please select Not in English from the drop-down menu. If you can make corrections to lines such as this, so if you have knowledge of Latin, for example, then please do make changes if you're able to. But otherwise, just click Done and move on to the next line that you're presented with. And by tagging these images as image unclear or partially unclear, what you're doing is flagging this to the project team so that we can have a look at this example, and we know that there's perhaps some things that we need to double check with this image. Now, if there's something particularly interesting about this image, or perhaps you're unsure about how to deal with something, perhaps you maybe want to discuss it with members of the project team or other Zooniverse members, you can click the button that says Done and Talk, and it will create a post on our talk boards about that particular image. So if I click Done and Talk, we zoom over to the talk boards and we can see that we've brought this image with us. That's the same image. And you can ask a question about this particular image, and other Zooniverse users and the project team will be able to also look at this image and perhaps answer any questions that you might have about it. Over on our talk boards, we've had lots of really interesting discussions from different users about interesting things they found in wills, or perhaps slightly odd spellings or words that they found. So that's how to create a screenshot over on the talk boards. In the main classification workflow as well, we have a very detailed field guide. So when providing these transcriptions, there's quite a few conventions that we'd like you to bear in mind. So in general, we ask users to transcribe everything as it is written, so using the same spelling, punctuation, and capitalization as you see in the original handwritten will. But in our field guide, we've got full details of our different transcription conventions. In the field guide, you can also find lots of guidance on paleography, or how to read early modern handwriting. And there's lots of links to some really useful external paleography resources as well. We've also got some useful resources here, including secretary hand alphabets with upper and lowercase letters. We've got the same for italic hands as well, so you can see what different letter forms looked like. We've got examples of common words, phrases, and symbols, as well as some sample transcriptions of will preambles from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So there's lots of guidance here and things to cross-reference if you're just starting out and you're not sure what something looks like. But I think our main message is don't worry too much. So please don't worry if you're not able to read some or all of a transcription, or if you're not sure what to write. Each image is going to be checked multiple times by different users, and the resulting corrections are going to be compared by the project team. So consequently, any response that you give us is still going to be valuable. And you can also get more support by going to our talk boards, which I've mentioned briefly. So I'm just going to, yes, I would like to leave this page and go over to the talk boards. And on our talk boards, we've got conversations about individual extracts from wills, as I've mentioned. We've also got very active conversations about interesting or funny things that people have found in the wills, as Laura has already mentioned. And our colleague Harry Smith, who has set up this Zooniverse site, is very active in answering questions on here, as well as other members of our project team. And you can also find some guidance and training videos over on our YouTube channel. So our YouTube channel is youtube.com/@materialwills. You can see here that we've got a longer 7-minute video about how to get started with using Zooniverse. We've also got some shorter troubleshooting videos as well. So if you have a question and you're not sure where to start, YouTube is a good place to look. And I wanted to finish by sharing some project statistics from our Zooniverse site so far. So we launched this Zooniverse site on October 15th, so just about a month ago. We've already, as you can see, got 1,200 volunteers who are signed up. Yesterday, for example, we had 4,197 lines of text that were checked. So you can see that it's a really active community of people getting involved in the project. And we just wanted to say on behalf of the whole project team, if you've already had a go at using our Zooniverse site, then thank you for all of your contributions. And if you, yes, indeed, a round of applause. And if you haven't had a go yet, we hope you found this webinar interesting and that you might come and join us over at Zooniverse. And I'll just end by sharing that slide again that shows us how to get to the Zooniverse site. I'll just load that up. And on this slide, we've got the link to our YouTube channel. We've got, back again. We've got the link to our project website. You can follow us on Twitter, or now known as X, at @materialwills. You can follow us on Blue Sky at materialwills.bsky.social. There's a QR code to our Zooniverse site as well as the link as well. And we tweet and post quite regularly with project updates. We also write quite regular blog posts about wills, including our Will of the Month series, where we feature an interesting will every month, which contains lots of interesting bequests. And in the near future as well, we also hope that we're going to run other online events, including additional webinars and a transcribe-a-thon, we hope, in the near future. So do keep your eyes peeled for further information about those. So, Laura or Jane, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, thank you, Emily. That was, I'm sure, really helpful to people just to see what transcribing online involves. It's really easy and quick to get involved, and to, you know, hopefully find enjoyment in it, find satisfaction in it, and obviously really help us out in terms of producing the transcriptions so that we can write lots of exciting things about them. So I would just say thank you very much for attending and joining, and see if Jane has anything to add.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to thank all our volunteers for making this possible. It's been like a dream of mine to do this project, and it's just wonderful to see it finally happening. And I'm really looking forward to sharing all our findings with everyone who's been involved.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Laura, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. As mentioned, we have been recording this webinar and we're going to upload it imminently onto our YouTube channel. So thank you very much again.